Hello.
Hello.
Hello, how are you?
Good,
Good.
good. Um, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready. I don't see you though. Do you see me?
No, we
No.
don't see you.
Mm-hmm.
We so both of us have video on, but neither of us can see each other. Hmm.
Okay, I see you now.
Oh,
Okay.
okay. Hi.
That's great. Hello.
Hi.
We still don't see your video though, but that's fine.
Alright.
Okay. So could
Okay.
you talk? Okay. Could you talk to us about your life before joining the Tuskegee Airmen?
Oh, I grew up in South Philadelphia. Uh, Went to public schools. First school, elementary, it was a segregated school. Then I went to junior high school, which was thoroughly integrated, and then went to uh, junior high and then high school, and graduated in June 1942. I had turned 17 that same month, so I had a year to wait to go before I can go into the service. So then I actually took the aviation cadet exam at the age of 17.
Oh.
If you were a high school graduate and 17 years old, you could take the exam. So I took it and passed it in March of 1943. That way, I passed it so that I was sworn into the reserve, and then I didn't have to register for the draft when I turned 18. And those doing the war, as soon as you turn 18, you had to register for the draft, and you might be drafted right away. So that protected me from the draft. And later that month, I received orders to report in July of 1943. And I reported for basic training then. But yes, I grew up in South Philadelphia a long, long time ago.
Can you talk to us about how society was like back then?
Well, society and segregation was a big thing in the United States then. And the South was rigidly segregated by law, and but in Philadelphia and the northern states and the western states, they didn't have laws on segregation, but there was still racial discrimination. Black people, many hotels would not really accept you if they could get away with it in Philadelphia, and many restaurants blacks couldn't go to, and even theaters and whatnot. But the thing is, we could go to most places, uh, so that didn't bother us because we did have a freedom and whatnot, and could go where almost every place we wanted to. But like I say, my elementary school was a segregated school, but I could have gone to an integrated school, but that was the closest one to me, so that's where I went.
I see.
So it was that sort of thing that you have in Pennsylvania. No laws dictated segregation. It was almost like a gentleman's agreement. What you wanted to, if you had a restaurant you didn't want to serve black people, you could get away with it if you handle it properly. So there are things like that. So.
Okay. So how did you find out about the Tuskegee program?
Well, I knew about the Tuskegee program because one thing, I wanted to go into the Navy, but my father wouldn't. When I graduated from high school, I was 17 years old, and the Navy would take you at 17, but your parents would have to sign for you. But my father wouldn't sign for me because of segregation. The Navy was rigidly segregated, and my brother went in 1941, and they made him a cook. That's about all he could be in the service, see. So my father wouldn't sign for me to do that. So, but then I'm glad he did not sign the paper now, because in that year I thought about aviation, and one at a time, and of course there were black newspapers which told every week they would report about the Tuskegee, the pilots graduating and flying, going overseas, whatnot. And they went overseas in 1943 initially, about the time I took my aviation cadet exam. And when I took the exam, I applied specifically to go to Tuskegee. So I'm light skinned, and people may not catch me at the time right away that I am black, see. So so I specifically applied to go to Tuskegee and was accepted to go down there. And but it's just that young, and you growing up during the war started, and And you say, what are you going to do? Everybody's going to go into the war. And I was impressed by the way the RAF saved Britain during the Battle of Britain when they stopped the Germans from invading. It was mainly because they turned back the Luftwaffe, and so that excites you, and so I wanted to fly. Besides, I read where the pilots always ate well when I went back,
So what was training like at Tuskegee?
What?
What was training like at Tuskegee?
Well, training, the same as any other base. I found out later when I got to talk to people who went to white schools, but it was rigid, really tough for me because that's such a rigid schedule. Up first thing in the morning, and and I used to call the physical training instructors, the madmen. They were they really wore you out, see, and but they were just getting us into physical condition. So we're rigidly controlled as far as time and cadets and whatnot. But it paid off, I think. And, but of course, we lost most of the people. We started with about 80 and ended up with 32 graduated as pilots, say. No.
All right. Were there any racial difficulties on base?
Well, not on base when I got there. Initially, Tuskegee was rigidly segregated. But then when Colonel Parrish took over, he changed a lot of that. And but off base was a problem. Down in Alabama, the minute you walk through the gate, you're in a different world. And so a lot of us, when we left the base, we get a bus and go to Tuskegee Institute, where you could walk around and have freedom there. But we just didn't like to go to the towns like Tuskegee or Montgomery, whatnot, because there's real segregation there. And anything that happened, you could be arrested or whatnot. And it's just a tough world down there.
So could you tell us about Noel Parrish?
Noel Parrish was he was a flight instructor first. The first commander at Tuskegee, he instituted racial barriers on the base, whatnot.
Selway?
No, it's Kimball. Selway is at.
Yeah, that's right. And then Colonel Parrish took over eventually, and Colonel Parrish changed things. It wasn't easy for the white instructors who were there because the black instructors going to the officers club and whatnot, the white instructors tended not to. But Colonel Parrish, this was a black base, and so they could. It was their base basically, and so everyone. It was great having him there. I think he's one of the real reasons why it was, I consider, very successful.
All right. So, when did you actually end up finishing your training?
When did I finish?
Yeah.
Oh, I entered training in December 1943. Well, see, I went in July of 43. I went to basic training at Keystone, Mississippi, where you just go to every person going into the Army gets basic training. How to use the weapons, how to do this, how to do that, how to use a bayonet, things like that, the basics of being in the Army, whatnot. And then we went to, after 6 weeks of that, I went to Tuskegee Institute. It was supposed to be 5 months of college training. See, I was a high school graduate. High school graduates, they wanted to have some, when you started out before the war, you had to be a college graduate to become an aviation cadet, say. Then reduced it to 2 years, and as fewer people available, reduced it to high school, say. But high school graduates, they sent to 5 months of college training to teach them math, physics, things like that. But we only went 3 months. They cut it short and started us in cadets in December 43 for pre-flight, 10 weeks of that. Then 4 phases, pre-flight, primary, basic, and advanced. Primary is when you first started flying. And that's when we started losing people. We moved from Tuskegee Army Airfield to Tuskegee Institute, and we lived at Tuskegee Institute for primary flying because Tuskegee had the contract for primary flying. During World War II, the Army didn't teach primary flying. They contracted that out to civilian colleges or flying schools because they didn't have enough instructors in the Army to handle all of that. So they contracted that out. And so we had the black instructors hired by Tuskegee Institute. They had a flying program before we went there. And so they were the ones who taught us to fly, civilian black instructors in primary flying. But we still lost a lot of people in primary flying. And then we went back to Tuskegee Army Airfield, where we went to basic flying, 10 weeks, then 10 weeks of advanced flying. And those two phases, we had white Army instructors to teach us how to fly, teach us basic and advanced flying skills. But I will say this, that most of our instructors in basic and advanced were white, but they were very good. And they really did the best to teach us, I thought. So I learned a lot, so much from them.
So after you completed your training, you were sent overseas. So how was your experience?
Well, before you can go overseas, we flew trainers. But before going overseas, you had to learn combat in an actual fighter aircraft. And we went to Waldoboro Army Airfield in South Carolina for that. And that was another really segregated area. But we went to from November to January in Waldoboro. Then we went overseas and was shipped overseas in February 1945. And I started flying missions in March and April 1945. I got there at the end. I only flew a couple of months, 21 combat missions. And we flew high altitude escort over Germany. And then if we had enough fuel after the bombers were safe, headed home, we could then go down and strafe targets of opportunity. And but by the time we got over there, the Luftwaffe was not what it had been. So I had never got combat with a German airplane, although we saw some of the jets around. They had jets at that time. But anyway, I flew 21 combat missions over there.
Do any missions stick out in your memory?
Well, the missions that stick out in your memory was more so that I remember losing people.
Oh.
If someone hit with flak or something that is fire from the ground and going down. And one of my good friends, he was never seen again, but he went down over a mission. But then the missions that stand out as far as I'm concerned are the ones where you strafe, shooting at targets on the ground. And the first time you see rounds coming at you, you wonder what that is, and then you realize what it is, that they're firing at you too, see. And we lost a number of people on strafing missions. But I was only hit once by a small arm, but that was it. I was just fortunate. Someone was looking out for me.
So after some of your friends were shot down, did any of them end up getting taken prisoner?
Well, some people were taken prisoner, but my classmates, I lost 3 classmates over there, 3 in combat missions, and then 2 in accidents. So I lost 5 over there. And but none of them became prisoners of war. Those 3 over there were actually killed, see. And
yeah.
But we did have people who were taken prisoners, and one of them, Alexander Jefferson, refers to the fact that although he was black, the Germans treated him as an officer. They had respect that he was an officer and a pilot, and that was he felt was quite significant as part of his experience.
Well, we've also seen in our research that the German POWs were better treated in the U.S. than you guys were. Is that true?
The German POWs over here were treated much, much better. In fact, that's one of the things that some of our folks were upset about, is that you had bases like Godman Field, Kentucky, and other bases where there were German prisoners, and they allowed them to walk around the base, whatnot, and they could go places where they didn't allow blacks to go. Like they could go to a movie and things like that. Can you imagine the prisoners going to movies and whatnot? But they allowed them to do that, say. And but overseas, when you're a prisoner, they put you in prison camp, in a prison, and held you. You didn't get out. You didn't have any freedom at all, say. But over here, we allowed German prisoners to do chores and whatnot around the base, whatnot, and they more or less were allowed to just go free. And it's just amazing to us as some of the people were just so upset that they seem to be able to have more freedom than blacks on on some of the bases.
Also, I was wondering, Benjamin O. Davis was the commander of the 332nd. Did you ever end up meeting him?
Oh yes, we met him quite often. He was our commander. He would talk to us, and you'd see him at various functions, whatnot. But almost when we have briefing, he would be there to kick it off, things like that. And when we come back, he'd talk to us when we'd after a mission, whatnot. And you'd see him at various social functions on the base, whatnot. So I served with him over there when he was a commander of the 332nd when I was over there. Then I came back, and eventually I served under him at Lockburn Air Force Base in 1946. I got out in 46, came back in 48, and served under him again there at Lockburn in 1948. But then I left shortly after that, and I didn't run into him again after that for the rest of my career.
So do you know about the Double V campaign?
Well, that was a double victory. It's people say they, blacks talk about they want a victory against the Germans, victory against the Germans and Japs, and they're also fighting for victory back here in the States. For segregation was so rigid back here, particularly in the South. It was really, they had white and colored drinking fountains, and you get on a bus, blacks had to go to the back, and whites in front, and things like that. In movies, quite often, whites would go in the front door, but blacks would have to go on the side door and go up in the balcony. So in the South, it was rigidly enforced by law. And if you violated one of those laws, you could be arrested, see. So it was, and during that time, particularly in the 30s and 40s, there were a lot of blacks being lynched. That means whites would get them and hang them from a tree, for something, whatever, whether real or imagined. They didn't hesitate to do that, see. So, and that was every year. So many blacks were lynched in the South, and that's just how rigid it was. All it would take is someone yell at, and it seemed like all the whites in the area would suddenly become inflamed and ready to lynch the guy. It's amazing the mindset of so many of the people.
Yeah, that's terrible.
Yes, during that time period.
Yeah, when I went to Keesler Field for basic training, most of the guys were from up north, and we didn't get off the base very much in basic training. They keep you on the base, but we did get a pass once, and we went in town, and no one wanted to go back after that, see, because the black section of town was segregated. And I'll say this about Biloxi, Mississippi. You could be blindfolded and riding in the car, and you could tell when you got to the black section because the streets in the black section weren't paved. So that shows you how different things were in areas in the South, and the separation between the races.
Did you guys receive any appreciation for protecting your country when you came back home?
Well, not then. And in fact, the guys would say that they would come back, and when the group came back, they got off the ship, and a sign would say, colored this way, white that way, to let you know right away you're back in the States, and you have to go to your areas. This is even in New York, you come down the gangway, and they're colored to the right. And because the services were all rigidly segregated at that time, Army, Navy, and there was no Air Force. It was the Air Corps was part of the Army at that time, and they were rigidly segregated.
So America at the time treated blacks like second-class citizens. Why would you want to fight for a country like that?
Well, for us, it's my country too.
Mm-hmm.
I'm born here, raised here, and it's my country too. And the thing is, you figure that somehow this thing has got to change, and we've got to do all we can to change it. And I think that we help quite a bit in changing it, because when you get right down to it, we were in the Air Force. After the Army separated, we were in the Air Force, and the Air Force became a separate service in 1947.
Mm-hmm.
And 7 months later, the Air Force announced they were going to desegregate. They were going to make assignments in April 1948. The Chief of Staff, General Spaatz, announced that the Air Force was going to make changes where assignments would be based on job requirements and individual qualifications, and race would no longer be a factor. And they said that they were going to develop a plan as to how and when that would be implemented. And so that was in April 1948. And then 3 months later, President Truman signed the executive order directing that the Army and Navy and Air Force do the same thing, develop their plan for racial integration. And so the Air Force was the first service to kick it off. In fact, if you a fellow named Stuart Symington was the first Secretary of the Air Force. He was a businessman from Missouri, same as President Truman, and he was first Secretary of the Air Force, and he was instrumental in the Air Force's decision. And so, if you, according to the Air Force Times, President Truman asked him to help him write the executive order. And there's a picture of the Air Force Times published with Secretary Stuart Symington, his wife, and President Truman together at the time of the signing. And it said that Secretary Symington co-authored the executive order with the president, which is much more active than just staffing. Normally, executive orders are put together by your staff.
Yeah.
And they come up with the final thing. But it said that Symington co-authored it with the president because Stuart Symington was involved in the April 1948 decision of the Air Force to integrate. And so the Air Force was the first service to actually start implementing racial integration.
So, do you feel that the actions of the Tuskegee Airmen helped lead to that?
I think so, because a number of the generals in the Air Force, when the Air Force separated from the Army, if you take a consensus, most of the generals were somewhat younger than the regular generals in the Army, see. And of course, a lot of them were pilots and whatnot. In fact, all the leaders were pilots. And a number of them had experience with the 332nd and the 99th in Europe. And they were more or less willing to accept the fact that the guys could fly as well as anybody else.
So, in your opinion, what effect did the Tuskegee Airmen have on the civil rights movement?
Well, I'm not sure what effect it. Well, here's what happened. When President Truman signed that executive order directing the service to integrate, the Democrats in the South rebelled. And a lot of them left the Democratic Party and formed the States' Rights Party with a fellow named Strom Thurmond as their candidate for president. In November, they were voting for the president in 1948. And he ran against Truman, see. And he carried a couple of southern states, but President Truman still prevailed and won, see. And so the Democrats eventually came back to the people who went to the States' Rights Party in the South, eventually came back to the Democratic Party. And but the thing is, Truman's action really upset them, see. But that was a part of the civil rights effort, the fact that the military started integrating, see. So the Army, the Air Force, really integration started 1 July 1949, when they deactivated the 332nd Fighter Group at Lockbourne, and everybody at Lockbourne started receiving orders transferring them to white bases all over the world. And over a period of a relatively short period, they all got orders shipping them all around the world. And so that was the start of integration in the armed forces.
Okay. So
And that was a national thing. It covered the whole country because of military bases all across the country. So
after you returned from Europe, you eventually returned to the Air Force to fight in the Korean and Vietnam War.
yes.
What was that like?
Well, it was. When I went back into service in '48, I went to Airborne Electronics Maintenance Officer School, 10 months to learn about electronics on airplanes, radar, things like that. And I finished in August of 1949, and I shipped to an integrated out to 19 Bomb Group on an island of Guam, B-29s, as a maintenance officer. And I was the first officer of color in the 19th Bomb Group.
Oh,
Wow.
And in fact, I think I was the first person of color in the 19th Bomb Group when I got there. And I was running a section of about 25, 30 airmen, maintenance on the 20th Bomb Squadron B-29s. And all the people who worked under me were white.
Mhm.
And all airmen, all were white. But as a pilot, I also flew on a crew. So when the Korean War started, we moved to Okinawa, and I was on a crew and ended up flying. In addition to my maintenance job, I ended up flying 45 combat missions over Korea.
Oh, wow.
But I had problems then too, because there were people in the Air Force that didn't like racial integration. And then I got to Guam in October 1949. In May 1950, I got a new squadron commander who wouldn't talk to me,
Oh.
except in the line of duty. And I was a maintenance officer, so he would talk to me about the maintenance. But other than that, at the officers club, he would ignore me. He just wouldn't have anything to say to me. Even when I happened to say something to him a couple of times, he just walked away, saying. And later, when we started flying missions, he didn't want me to fly. So 12th of July, 1950, on my 7th mission, getting ready for our 7th mission, he pulled me off the airplane at the last minute and replaced me as a co-pilot. It so happened that was the first B-29 shot down over Korea. And my crew was on it, and I wasn't there with them. So, but fortunately for me, I always say someone's looking out for me. A few weeks later, he transferred to wing as a deputy wing commander, and so I got a new squadron commander who put me back flying again.
Great.
But interestingly enough, 10 years later, I worked for that same officer again. That same officer who wouldn't speak to me. Okay, everything okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just dropped something.
Yeah, okay. 10 years later, in 1960, I reported to Plattsburgh Air Force Base, New York. I was a major, and became a squadron commander in an air refueling wing, maintenance squadron commander, A&E maintenance squadron commander. And that same officer who wouldn't speak to me on Guam was now my wing commander, Colonel Fred W. Miller. And I served under him for a little over 2 years. And I would say, career-wise, that was the best 2.5, little over 2 years in my service. He had changed completely towards me up at Plattsburgh. So he helped me quite a bit up there. And especially when one day he walked in, I was sitting at you sit at the bar with just having a beer or something, and he slapped me on the back and said, "George and I fought the Korean War together." I said to myself, yeah. But I was able to see things change while I was in the service, which at least with some people. So that's a big plus.
Yeah.
It's great to see that he changed. But do you feel like during the Korean War, do you feel like that commander's opinion was the opinion of many Americans that blacks couldn't fly?
Well, it could have been. It probably was. Probably a lot of them. See, a lot of people you never know, say, unless you come into contact with them or have occasion to have to do something with them or things like that, say. But one of the things they had during the war was would never want a black person over a white person. Yeah. And that was tough in some cases, say. And for myself, I was able to see how that changed, because when we got to the Vietnam War, I ended up as a detachment commander, and all the pilots under me and navigators and bombardiers were white. And so that was a complete change of the way it was during World War II. So, it gives you a good feeling to know that things can change, and they did change for the better,
Okay, so do you have any advice for today's youths?
Youth?
Yeah. for this generation?
Education.
Education.
You know, the thing is, one thing I'll say about the cadets I went into, most of the guys, I wouldn't say they love going to school, but they really wanted to learn, to go to school. And when they went to school, the elementary, middle school, high school, they applied themselves. And so when they got in, they knew what it was to study, things like that, to learn something. And I will say this, that a youngster who knows math, things like that, science, whatnot, can go far in this country.
Yeah.
I find so often so many of them, they just don't take those things seriously. And that's fortunate. I always loved math, so that helped me quite a bit. So I say education is such a key to everything, anything you want to do in this country. But things are happening so fast today, like in electronics. Geez. You know, in 1964, I went to graduate school, and IBM 1620 computer was a huge thing. And now that little iPhone you have has much more capability than that, say. So we've come so far, which means, geez, how much for the future is going to be very interesting, I think.
Yeah. So is there anything else that you'd like to share or discuss that we haven't talked about?
Well, not really, but I will say this. I always talk to people. You know, you see people coming out of high school and whatnot, and they're not sure what they want to do. I say, go into service. It was, of course, we've had some tough times with Iraq and Afghanistan, the same people fighting wars over and over again. But there's so much opportunity in the service. You know, I went in as a high school kid. I went out and went to college for 1 year, but I went back in and I got Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering in the service at Air Force Institute of Technology, and I also went and got a master's degree in systems engineering. Now, you know, that's it didn't cost me anything except being there, you know. And so I say, where can you get that anyplace else? But and like I say, you go in the service, you're not sure what you want to do. They'll give you something to do. You may not like it, but you'll then have reason to decide what you want to do. So I think it tends to give you direction. It sure gave me a lot of direction and discipline.
Yeah.
You know, when you say discipline doesn't mean someone beating you a lot. It means going down the right path, say, making sure you go down the right path. And that's that I think is something so many of our youngsters can use today.
Yeah.
Alright.
Okay.
Now, is it,
Yeah. Thank you for
Thanks.
your time.
is there anything else I can do to help you? Is you need anything or what?
No,
No,
I think this has been great.
a lot.
Okay, good. It's so nice talking to you.
Yeah,
How
it was
old are
great
you?
talking to you.
How old are you?
We're both 16.
I'm 15.
Okay, you're 15
and you're
and I'm 16.
You're 16 now. Okay, now you're Chelsea.
Chelsea, yeah, and then this is
and I'm
James.
James, okay then. Well, it's so interesting. I like talking to you. Where'd you originally from?
Oh, we're both from North Carolina.
I'm from Mississippi.
Oh, he's from
Where are your
Mississippi.
parents from?
Oh, China.
China.
Okay. I wasn't in China. I was in Japan and Formosa and Hong Kong and
Nice.
places like that. And I got to look up from Hong Kong over China, see the big pipes with the water coming down for the people in Hong Kong, coming from China. You know? That was very interesting. You know, as much as the politics over there, they continued to supply them with the fresh water coming down those pipes to Hong Kong. So, very interesting place. Okay.
Okay. It's been an honor to talk to you, Mr. Hardy.
Okay. Thank you for calling me. I appreciate it. You take care. The best of luck to you.
Yeah. Have a nice day. Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.